We're in our second week of a three-series worship series in which is entitled When the Bottom of Life Falls Out. And we've been looking and exploring the book of Job as we've looked at this worship series. Last week we didn't spell out what the sufferings of Job were, but consider what Job's sufferings are in chapters 1 and 2. The Sabines took Job's oxen and his donkeys and killed the servants that were with those oxen and donkeys. And then further beyond that, fire from heaven burned up Job's sheep and also the servants that were caring for those sheep. And then the Chaldeans took Job's camels and killed the servants that were caring for the camels. And a great wind came and killed Job's children when they were all gathered at Job's oldest son's house. They were eating and drinking together, and a wind came up and destroyed their home, and they were killed. To top it all off, Job then receives sores from the bottom of his feet to the top of his head, just to add insult to injury and the suffering of Job. As we look today at the 23rd chapter of Job, Job is now deep in the trials upon his life. He has seen many troubles and many difficulties. He's in the company of his friends, which you'd think would be a good thing. They're trying to counsel him, but Job is too deep in his pit in the darkness. He's wallowing in self-pity, and there aren't many who would blame him for complaining, just looking at the list of things that have happened to him in his days. Let me say a word about Job's friends. I'm not going to be reading Job's friends' comments to him, but let's just say that these good friends, well, they're good until they open their mouths. You know, that's sometimes that's the way friendships go. You know, they're good until they say a word. You know, they were just perfect as they sat there with Job as he was dealing with all these sufferings. But then they opened their mouths. They should have stuck with silence. Sometimes you and I can be our best friendship as ones who don't necessarily say a word, but are just with those who are going through a difficult circumstance. We want to comfort those who are suffering, but we sometimes do harm, especially with our pat phrases and cliches that maybe we don't even believe, but we thought, well, maybe this will bring you comfort if I say, God surely has a plan. You know, God has a plan, and you're just going to have to figure it out what that plan is, or God won't give you more than you can handle, or all things work for good for those who love God. I mean, those kind of statements, they're meant to be a friendly word, a word of comfort, but often to those who are suffering, silence would have been a better way to go. It makes them silent to not know what to say because they're struggling and they don't know how it fits into what they're dealing with. So note to self, don't be like Job's friends. So we come to the 23rd chapter, and Job begins to express his dismay. He finally is giving voice to his just unbelief that God seems so distant and not present. Job feels deserted by God. Listen to this reading from the book of Job, chapter 23. Then Job answered to his friends, "Today also my complaint is bitter. God's hand is heavy despite my groaning. Oh, that I knew where I might find God, that I might come even to his dwelling. I would lay my case before him. I would fill my mouth with arguments. I would learn what he would answer me and understand what he would say to me. Would he contend with me in the greatness of his power? No, but he would give heed to me. There an upright person would reason with him, and I should be acquitted forever by my judge. If I go forward, he's not there, or backward, I cannot perceive him. On the left he hides, and I cannot hold him. I turn to the right, but I cannot see him. God has made my heart faint. The Almighty has terrified me. If only I could vanish in darkness, and thick darkness would cover my face." Thanks be to God for this reading of the book of Job. So at this point in the book of Job, there are no answers to the questions. God hasn't spoken directly to Job in this part of the story. There's only the acknowledgement that there are honest questions that Job is struggling with, feelings that he's about not understanding what's happening to him. What times have you been in Job's shoes, where you've been wondering, what is this all about? The bottom of life has fallen out, and I cannot make sense of what I'm experiencing. Where is God in this? Are there experiences that have left you wounded and broken, perhaps even dejected and deserted? Have you seen the movie Little Miss Sunshine? It doesn't have much sunshine all the way through the movie, but there's this one moment where a young man has vowed that he will not speak again until he's able to become a pilot. His whole energy is focused on becoming a pilot, and the family is traveling, and we'll just take a look at this experience, a very raw moment in the movie. It's like that just brings you to your knees. And when you're with someone who's experienced something that just seems like it's not going to ever be good again, how do you come alongside them? What's the way to be with them? Last week, I introduced a concept of rising strong process from Brené Brown in her book, Rising Strong. She has this threefold process that looks at how we might rise again after a situation that has brought us low, where we feel like we're at the bottom. The reckoning, walk into our story, the rumble, owning our story, and then finally a revolution, writing a new ending and changing how we engage with the world. This week, as we look at Job, we're looking at the rumble. Last week we focused on the reckoning, but today we focus on the rumbling of our lives. Even though Christian faith has its process towards hope and revolution, I found that just like reckoning, and I mentioned this last week, that we don't always try to reckon with where we are. We move on too quickly. So it is with the process of rumbling as well. We don't live in that long enough for it to be able to shape who we might become. Are we ready to rumble? Are we ready to rumble with the questions of our lives? The first questions to ask in the rumbling, Brené Brown says, are simple questions. Questions like these: what more do I need to learn and understand about the situation? That's a first rumbling question. To live into that question is an important part of coming to terms with the situation we face. What more do I need to learn and understand about the situation? What more do I need to learn and understand about other people in the story, the people that are a part of my story and the situation that I face? What can I learn and understand from them? And finally, what more do I need to learn and understand about myself? Those are the rumbling questions that we can help us refocus and move towards a revolution, as Brené Brown puts it. How we rumble and question depends on who we are and what life experience we have. But there are some rumbling topics that are worth investigating more than others. Here, Brené Brown just lifts up a few of the rumbling topics that are worthy to consider: grief, perfectionism, shame. She's got a whole chapter on shame. That's something that we should definitely focus on from her point of view. Trust, blame, all of these things, accountability, just to name a few, are worth rumbling about, worth going deep and understanding more fully and answering those questions about what can I understand about this situation, about the other people in my story, and about myself, because I've rumbled with these important questions. What questions do you need to rumble with at this point in your life? What would you say you're in the midst of rumbling and trying to figure out in your life? What questions do you need to live with a bit more. Rainier Rilke has been an influential poet for me, especially around a particular quote from his Letter to a Young Poet collection of letters that he wrote to a young poet. He was mentoring him, and he writes this quote: "Be patient toward all that is unsolved in your heart, and try to love the questions themselves. Do not now seek the answers which cannot be given you, because you would not be able to live them. And the point is to live everything. Live the questions now. Perhaps you will then gradually, without noticing it, live along some distant day into the answer." I think this gets at the heart of what that experience for Job was. A moment in time when he needed to live the questions, when he needed to rumble a bit, as Brene Brown puts it. To learn those questions and to ask the questions and not seek answers too quickly, to live the questions now. There are periods in our life when we need to live the questions, and it can make us go deeper in our faith. It's very poetic, definitely a poem. Poetic and a poet to be able to say that, to live the questions now. But what does it mean to live the questions? I'm helped by Reverend Henry Brighton here. He tells of an unidentified author who was writing on a website in the Intelligence Institute. Tells in this writing, we don't even know if it's a he or a she in the writing on this particular website, but tells of being in a dialogue group in the early 1990s where one of the exercises in the conversation consisted entirely of questions, no answers. That's what they were trying to do, just ask questions. And so they were only asking questions about the experience that they were facing. The participants could talk about any topic that came up, but only ask questions, make no statements, or give answers. The author says that he or she found the experience to be profoundly transformative. She said that in such an exercise, several different types of questions will arise, including statements masquerading as questions, rhetorical questions, open-ended questions, questions that simply direct attention, strategic questions, questions that modify, overlap, or focus on some portion of another question, or they link to issues of a previous question or to another area of inquiry. She added, powerful questions simultaneously open up and focus our attention. Live the questions now. The author said that the exercise is a great opportunity to explore what relationship we can have to questions other than answering them. And that's the important part of this. Ultimately, the author said, questions can take us deeper into the meaning of our lives. Too often, we look for the answer, and once we have an answer, we think we've got it figured out. What would it look like to live the questions a bit more? To live into the answers by living the questions now. That is, we don't necessarily have to have the answers in order for our questions to push us into a new way of looking at our lives. When we live the questions in our conversations, says this author, we are in dialogue with the people around us. And when we live the questions as a way of life, we're in dialogue with life itself. Life itself can help us move forward. Living the questions now, it's a willingness to rumble before answers come. It's giving room for discernment to live the questions now. Did you know that this was built into the DNA of United Methodists? This kind of idea of living the questions is built into the DNA of being a United Methodist. The early Methodists had what were called class meetings. Have you heard of those? The class meetings were for the early converts who had been coming to hear John Wesley or Charles Wesley preach and lead worship. They would divide them up into groups, class meetings of 12 to 15 people. And there would be someone who was a leader, not one of the pastors, but another member of the Society of Methodists that would lead the class meeting. And the classes weren't for study. They didn't necessarily look at the Bible. They were really more like accountability clusters. That's what they were about. They asked the question, how is it with your soul? And they would do that collectively as a group. Each week they would gather and ask that question, how is it with your soul? They basically would be living the questions together. And through that, they lived into the answers of how they would live their lives together. They would celebrate, they would have sorrow and grief together. Each would have their spiritual victories and their failures shared with others in the group. But all that began with questioning. Each person was given their progress of how things had gone since last they had met. Many historians agree that the class meetings were a major source of the vitality of the early Methodists, because it was a part of who they were to ask the question, how is it with your soul? They practiced true empathy. They rumbled together with the questions. When a friend has had the bottom of life fall out, how can we live the questions with them? We need to get down in the bottom of the pit with them, to sit with them and be present with them. Back to that movie, Little Miss Sunshine, there's a moment where there's resolution. I think I should show you this. There's a bit of a turn for things, this moment of empathy that should guide us to take a look at this part of the movie. There's something about the way that she just came alongside him. A little sister that didn't say a word, just showed that she cared. And it was enough to turn him and pull him out of his pit and see if there wasn't another step that he could take and to return to life again. Friends, here's the thing about being a follower of Jesus. We follow one who knew our predicament, who suffers with us and for us. When Jesus was on the cross, he cried words, my God, why have you forsaken me?" How could Jesus say those words? What was he thinking when he said, my God, why have you forsaken me?" Well, he was quoting the 22nd Psalm. And in the 22nd Psalm, there's more that goes on than just that quote of, my God, why have you forsaken me?" It goes on, "Oh my God, I cry by day, but you do not answer, and by night, but find no rest. Yet you are holy, enthroned on the praises of Israel. In you our ancestors trusted, they trusted, and you delivered them. To you they cried and were saved. In you they trusted and were not put to shame." See, that's what was going through Jesus' mind there. It wasn't just the forsakenness, but the whole rest of the 22nd Psalm that he was thinking of. It ends with a word of promise. When in suffering, Jesus speaks life when he quotes the 22nd Psalm. And Christ, God, is with us and for us and gives us a model for how we might move through our sufferings and into a revolution. As he spoke those words on the cross, Christ revealed a trust in God that was deeper than any other. Trust even amid what seems like God's silence to the rest of the world. God became visible through Christ. Friends, may we be willing to be in the rumble, to live the questions for a moment in our lives, that we might live into trusting in God's grace for the rest of our lives. So be it, and may it be so.
This has been a broadcast of the First United Methodist Church in Cedar Falls. We're glad you joined us. We're here to help you on your journeys of life and faith. We gather for worship services and classes, support groups, and just for fun groups, and you're welcome at any one of them. Just show up and say, "Hi, I'm new here," and we'll take it from there. You can learn more about our church at aboutfirst.com, and you can follow us on Facebook and YouTube too. If you can't make it in person, we'll be right here on your TV at this same time next week. We'll see you then.